Okay, sorry for the quick break, but I'm back. More Q&A this week. We've got a question from Tadeáš, who asks, what would you say is the optimal range to practice technique in, intensity range? Say you have a lifter with decently developed technical skill, good squat, snatch ratio, etc., and no specific issues, who struggles with consistency at higher percentages. In this case, we're usually told to practice technique more, but how much should the load be lowered for the training and still be productive in this regard? There isn't really a specific intensity range for technique training because it's going to vary on a lot of things. The exercise, the nature of the problems you're having with that exercise, kind of the athlete's level of proficiency at that point, what the rest of the training cycle looks like at that point, all kinds of things. So the rule, in my opinion, for determining the intensity of technique specific work is the intensity that allows the best possible execution of the lift at that time by that athlete. In other words, you're going to really go more by feel and by appearance as a coach, looking for the lifter to do the movement as well as they possibly can according to the criteria you're looking at, right? So the lift overall needs to look as good as possible, but in particular, you're looking for, whatever element or elements of that lift that you're trying to correct at that time. So if you're, they look good at 70 to 75%, and then you take them to 78% and things kind of fall apart. Well, 78%, at least that day, is not a good intensity to work on technique, since they are not able to execute the technique you want them to. The only thing you're going to get out of practicing things poorly is being really good at doing them poorly, right? So having said that, for snatch and clean and jerk, you're generally looking kind of that 70 to 80% range, just as a real vague ballpark figure of where a lifter is typically going to be able to execute a lift very well, consistently, but there's enough weight that they can execute the lift naturally and properly. In other words, if you put them at 40% to do a snatch or a clean and jerk, they're not really going to be able to do it perfectly because the weight is so light. They have to really reduce how much force and even speed they're putting into it. So it's a bit difficult to kind of replicate the actual lift. So that 70-80% is kind of a good general range. Now, when you say that you lose consistency, or the lifter loses consistency at kind of heavier weights, more like 90%, doing technique work at 75 to 80% may not be specifically that helpful for whatever problem that lifter experiences at that threshold, right? You may need to train much closer to 90% to kind of flirt with that line where the weight starts eliciting these problems, so that you can train the corrections as close to that problem intensity as possible while still being able to execute the lift as well as you can. Hopefully that makes sense and didn't just sound like a word salad. You are absolutely going to get technical improvement by training lighter weights well, right? Even if the problem only occurs at 90% plus, or whatever the threshold is. Just generally speaking, the greater the volume of reps that you have performed very well, the better you are going to be able to perform reps at any intensity at any time, right? That's just kind of, moving up your baseline, technical proficiency. So don't feel like, if you're training the majority of your lifts in that 70 to 85% intensity range, that somehow that is not valuable. It's incredibly valuable. That's what most lifters are going to spend their time in. Something else you can do to work on consistency at heavier weights, and this is probably my favorite approach, is doing on the minute lifts, or as people who hate me like to call them, EMOMs. You don't need to say every minute on the minute. Of course it's every minute. Why would it not be every minute if you said on the minute? Like every third minute? Come on, guys. So on the minute stuff, and this, to my knowledge, originally comes from Joe Mills, who was an American coach many, many years ago, 60s, I believe. And it's kind of the same sort of structure that I use to this day. A lot of people use and for some reason credit like CrossFit with on-the-minute training, which of course is not correct. But in any case, your typical structure is going to be having 3 different weights, and at each of those weights, you're going to hit 5 singles on the minute, right? So you have, 15 singles in a row every single minute, right? And you're usually looking, if you've never done it before, you're probably going to start around 70 to 73% and end up at kind of 77 to 80% on that last weight. And then following that, if you're feeling good, if you didn't have misses, you might take it up to a heavier single. Not on the clock, but I like to keep people at 2 minutes rest or less once they're off the minute clock. And you can creep those on the minute weights up shockingly heavy. I mean, I've had lifters do 5 singles on the minute in like the low 90%, which seems to kind of defy all the standard rules of weightlifting and strength training in general. But again, if you're conditioned for it, you can do pretty much anything. The next best approach, which I don't like as much, but you may have some success with it, is basically kind of threshold training, right? So if your snatch tends to be totally fine all the way up, and then all of a sudden, like you hit say 110 kilos and it just falls apart, right? That's kind of the shit the bed threshold, or the pants shitting threshold, whatever you want to call it. You want to do as much work as you can as close to 110 as possible, right? So you maybe you're going to try to accumulate singles at 105, 106, right around there. And over time, kind of creep that up more like, 107, 109, and get to that point where you're really flirting with that pants shitting threshold without actually shitting your pants, right? And in that way, you are developing a lot of confidence at that weight. And a lot of times we have these weights in our head for whatever reason. We've decided that this is the weight I no longer know how to snatch at, right? I'm totally fine at 109, but as soon as you put 110 on there, I feel like I've never snatched before in my life. It's a ridiculous thing, but it happens to the best of us. So you may need to go from 108 to 111 or 109 to 111. You may just need to skip 110 for now if your head is that far up your butt about a certain number. Kind of a variation on that is doing progressive waves. So if you're trying to say get past 110 with really good movement, which of course you would always want to do, maybe you work say 100, 103, 106, and then you do 105, 107, 109, and then 107, 109, 111, or something like that. So with each wave you're getting a little closer to that threshold and then eventually passing it. If you are conditioned for that much work, that can work really well. And of course, you can get conditioned to that much work if you do it regularly for a while. But that can be a good way to kind of really get your body moving consistently and kind of find that groove, and then essentially trick your brain into forgetting that you're supposed to freak out at 110, right? So in short, you really have to determine what is appropriate for the actual problem that you're experiencing. And that is where you're going to determine the actual intensity. So if you figure out like, okay, well, in the snatch, my problem is really that I stop turning the bar over aggressively, or once it gets past a certain weight, I start, swinging it around. I don't keep the bar as close to me as possible as I'm pulling under. So maybe you're going to do tall snatches or muscle snatches or something like that. And those are totally perfect at 40%. And so, okay, I'm going to try, 43%. And all of a sudden you fall apart. Well, 43% is not a good technique weight then for that exercise. Try 41, 42%, whatever it is. Basically, you're trying to get up as high as you can, while still executing as well as possible, and then creep that weight up over time, on average at least. It's not just going to go up, in a linear fashion forever. So you really do have to do some experimentation, take good notes, really pay attention, use video if you're coaching yourself. If you're a coach, take good notes, and you can take video as well, and kind of keep track for each lifter or for yourself what tends to get the best results. What the context of that is, where in a cycle are they, and 40% muscle snatch might be fine at this time, but 8 weeks later in a cycle, 40% muscle snatch is either not enough or it's too much. So the better track you keep of those experiments, the more you're going to be able to actually learn from them and develop better approaches for yourself or your athletes.
Greg Everett with Catalyst Athletics here. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. If you have questions, post them in the comments. I answer all of them. Also check out catalystathletics.com for the biggest Olympic weightlifting exercise library out there, along with hundreds of free articles and videos and other resources for both athletes and coaches.